Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar this afternoon, Online Safety Training 101, How to Select the Right Solution for Your Company. I want to thank you so much for joining us. Please note this webinar is not eligible for any continuing education credit or professional development hours. This is strictly an informational only webinar. I would like to go over a few housekeeping items this afternoon. This webinar is being recorded. The recording and the presentation slides will be provided to registrants and attendees in a follow-up email that will either be provided to you later this week or the following week. If you're having technical difficulties right now, you can see my screen, but you're not hearing me talk, or vice versa, you can hear me, but you're not seeing my screen. Please use the questions icon to let us know, and we will answer you privately. The questions function is there for you to ask questions throughout the webinar. Feel free to use it at any time. Although we may not get to that question right away, we will make sure that it gets addressed. And last but not least, there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar, and your feedback is greatly appreciated. You should be prompted to complete that survey at the very end, but if for any reason you don't get to it, it will also be emailed to all of our attendees. So a little bit about Vector Solutions. You can see on the screen, we are the leading provider of SaaS-based compliance-driven enterprise e-learning, workforce management, and performance improvement solutions. We have locations in Tampa, San Diego, Cincinnati, Ohio, Salt Lake City, Camas, and Grants Pass. We were founded in 1999, and we have over 400 team members and counting, with more than 8,000 e-learning courses. So without further ado, my name is Casey Murray. I am the marketing strategist here, and I will be the webinar moderator this afternoon. I will be alongside Jeff, kind of fielding the questions and making sure that everything goes smoothly if there's any audio or technical difficulties. So Jeff, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right, great. Hi, Casey. Fun, as always, to get a chance to work with you from across the country. And hi to everybody out there. Thanks for taking a little bit of time to check in on our webinar here on selecting online safety training. I'm not going to bore you with the bullet points about me here. You can look at them on screen. What I am is a learning and development professional instructional designer who's worked in safety and safety training for more than 50 years. Just a couple things to call out to you guys. Casey already mentioned that you'll get an email, follow-up email with a recording of this webinar and a PowerPoint. That email will also include 2 guides that we think you'll find helpful. The first is just a safety training guide. It's based on the ANSI ASSP Z490 standard, just to help you create better safety training at work, in case you don't know things about learning objectives and training evaluations and stuff like that. Secondly, you'll get a online safety training buyer's guide checklist. We're assuming you're here because you're interested in maybe getting some online safety training, so that checklist will be helpful to you as well. We do have time at the end of this webinar for questions, but feel free to type in questions during the webinar, and Casey will help me try to field those when we can, kind of midstream. And a lot of the materials that we'll be talking about during this brief, 45 minutes to an hour, I have a lot more materials for you at the Convergence Training blog. Again, I'm the blogger for Convergence Training, so feel free to go out to the Convergence Training blog to access more information. And as we go through this webinar, I'll try to call out, moments where we have additional material at the blog, but essentially that's always true. And then last but not least, I invite you all to connect with me personally if you have additional questions or want to continue the discussion. My email is my first, jDalto@convergencetraining.com. But in addition, our companies are on all the major social medias, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and the best place to connect with me personally is on LinkedIn. So I welcome that kind of connection, either email or through LinkedIn, and encourage you to do so. And with that, we'll get started. And Casey, do you mind switching the presenter here for me?
No problem, Jeff. Let me go ahead and hand it over.
All right, thanks a lot.
You're all set.
Does it look fine from your side? You see my screen now?
It does. Thank you.
All right, everybody. So quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. I'll give you a couple quick ideas about what we're talking about in the different parts of online safety training when we're talking about online safety training. And I'll give you just a little tip about some things to look for in the future, even if we're not going to talk about them much or at all today. We'll talk about benefits of using online safety training, both for, I guess, the organization, the safety manager, but also employees. I'll talk about some, especially for the US audience, I apologize if anyone is international. We're going to focus on OSHA regulations and letters of interpretation regarding the use of online safety training, plus the recent ASSP standards, one of which I helped create, the one about online EHS training. We'll talk about the benefit of something called a blended learning solution and tie that back into the OSHA regulations and ASSP recommendations. And we'll wrap up by giving you some tips for beginning your search, both internally, what you should do in the office before you start looking, and externally, if you will, by giving you some criteria to evaluate courses, these software applications called Learning Management System, or LMS, and then also your safety training provider. All right, so.
Great. Sorry, Jeff. Could you tell us a little bit more about what exactly is online safety training?
Yeah, it might seem obvious, but it's not, especially when you try to break it down into components. And then, of course, there are issues of technology change that make it less obvious as well. Primarily, when people are talking about online safety training, they really might be traditionally be talking about two things. First, represented on the right are the actual courses, something on HAZCOM, something on fall protection, something on machine guarding, for example. And then secondly, a software tool called a Learning Management System, or LMS, to help you assign that training, deliver it online, track completion, run reports, and that kind, and keeps, store records over time. So we're going to talk about both of these things, courses and LMS, and we won't talk in detail, but it's a mobile world right now, so both of these things tend to be compatible with mobile apps as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, with courses, again, this is the stuff on HAZCOM or fall protection or lockout, tagout, or whatever it is. There's really kind of two primary ways that you can get these now. The first, represented on the left, is streaming video. And this is basically the Netflix model. A lot of us probably go home in the evening occasionally or on the weekend and dial up Netflix on the TV or on the computer and watch a movie that way. And, that's increasingly common. It's a technology we can all use. And so a lot of companies are doing that. And so you're seeing online safety training available in that format as well. There's some advantages to that, primarily how easy it is. And there's also some benefits it doesn't offer, largely having to do with the kind of tracking capabilities and other stuff that a learning management system can give you. So we'll talk more about that over time. And then secondly, the second alternative is what's been the industry standard for 20 or more years. Honestly, I don't know exactly how long, but something called an e-learning course. So it's got that same content, but that content is wrapped up. It has some videos or something like that, some practice questions, a test. It's wrapped up in a special format, and that makes it something you can import into one of these online software tools called an LMS, and then assign off to your workers. And you get a lot more functionality and a lot more stuff that's important for safety training in particular, but also compliance training in general through the pairing of the e-learning course and the learning management system. So a little more about that, the second component, if that's your intro to courses, The second component traditionally is a thing called a learning management system. And again, this is a software application. You can have it installed on your network. Increasingly common to have them on the cloud. We'll return to that issue a little bit later. But this is a really powerful application that allows you to do a lot of things. So you can import training. That might be an e-learning course like what we're talking about, but it could be a PDF or your own PowerPoint or a video you created. And they even have tools inside them so you can create your own training, things like an online quiz or a kind of an SOP for teaching people how to perform procedures safely in a kind of a checklist format. You can assign that training, universally to everybody at your organization, all the way down to through smaller units of your organization, down to just one individual if you want it, or maybe people in a work area, people who have a special job role, or people who perform a particular task like forklift operators. Obviously, it'll allow you to deliver the online component of that training online to your workers. So it makes it a lot easier to get training out to everybody. And we'll return to that because it's not just an online delivery tool. It obviously allows you to track who's done and not done. It allows you to report on not just who's done and not done, but how well people are understanding things and any number of other variables. Many LMSs might have 20 to 40 different reports in it for different aspects of training. Obviously storing those records over time so you don't have the metal file cabinet in the corner office full of manila envelopes that's overflowing and no one can make any sense of, or you don't have to be held hostage to your Excel spreadsheets. But the LMS also manages offline training, so it'll have functionality for assigning and tracking classroom training, field-based training, off-site conferences, sending people to a community college for additional education. Even if you wanted to, something as simple as a pre-task job discussion or an after-action review, or even the weekly safety meeting. So you can do all that, at least in terms of assignment and tracking within your LMS. And then it allows you to create different training paths, either for a person's career or for the particular hazards associated with his or her job. So really quite powerful. And again, a lot of this is all compatible with mobile devices these days. Really quickly, I want to call out, today we're not going to go into detail about these three things, but they're something to know about. First, we've hinted at a lot of this is available through mobile technology as well, the courses and the LMS. The second is virtual reality, or VR. You guys are probably all familiar with VR from gaming, but you're going to see that increasingly commonly in safety training as well. There's a little image here of a course we created for ladder safety. Augmented reality, which is a little different than virtual reality. If virtual reality is, I put on goggles and I am completely immersed in a completely false virtual world that I think is the real world. Augmented reality, you're just superimposing things on top of the real world, oftentimes using a tablet like we're seeing here on the screen. So you might use that to identify, pumps at the work site, and then procedures for how to maintain that pump over time. And then also chatbots. You probably might go to places like Amazon and have a chatbot ask you questions, but in the future, it's going to be increasingly common for that to be part of the workplace learning experience, where if I have a question, I can get the answer immediately from a chatbot instead of having to track down somebody who may or may not know the answer. So we won't talk about these today, but it's good to know about it.
Great. Can you tell us, I'm curious, what are some of the benefits of online safety training?
Yeah, it's and I'll return to this. There are some benefits to online safety training. That's not to say there aren't other benefits to offline safety training, if you will, and we'll return to that. But there are some unique benefits to online safety training. So I'm going to break it down into two groups. First, benefits to the organization or the safety manager, and second, benefits to the employee who is taking the training. And I guess I'll throw out a caveat initially and say this is a false distinction, and sometimes, the benefit applies to both sides, but, bear with me and know that sometimes things will apply to both. First, looking from the organization or the safety manager's perspective, one thing to keep in mind is none of us know everything about everything. So if you partner with training providers, safety training providers, it's going to give you access to a lot more topic expertise than the stuff that you personally know, or even the stuff that the people at your organization know. So you can kind of focus on the stuff that you really know well, and possibly farm out some of the stuff you're not as familiar with. The other thing, and if that's the safety content, or if you will, the other thing you might benefit from is more instructional design expertise. Instructional design is the field of understanding how humans, and in this case, primarily adults, learn, how to design training to maximize learning effectiveness. And not every organization that's running their own safety training has a lot of in-house expertise in instructional design. And in my experience, I do a lot of talking at conferences to safety managers and safety professionals who are delivering safety training every day. And frankly, it's very few of them. Usually in a group of 50, there's one person who might have a degree in education or instructional design. And usually it tops out at about 13 people who have read a book on the topic. And then often the other people don't have even that much experience. So that's something you can benefit from a safety training provider as well, as having in-house instructional designers. Obviously, online safety training, a key benefit that you're probably all aware of is how scalable it is. It's easier to deliver to more employees on different shifts, employees at multiple locations, and so on. If you're one of these safety managers who's trying to do all this by yourself by driving around from site to site, I think you'll see the benefit of that. It allows you to create a consistent and standard training message. If you're doing purely instructor-led training, even if everybody's sharing the same PowerPoint, if you will, or whatever your material is, it's hard even for one person to say give the same consistent message every training session. And if you have multiple people who are delivering to different audiences, you're going to have even more variability. Again, even if you're all working off the same base PowerPoint. It's going to save your time in two important ways. First of all, so that you can deliver some training using online safety training, and that allows you to maximize the time where there's really a benefit to having you involved in the safety training. Maybe because you want to see people, you want to demonstrate how to do something and then see them practice it and do it correctly, or you want a robust Q&A session where you can kind of make best use of your time. But also, you're busy and with things other than safety training, so it'll save your time for all that other stuff you do as safety managers. And that's true with the delivery of online safety training, but especially with the clerical and logistical hassles that you have involving scheduling rooms and trying to create records and all that. It'll lower your cost, especially over time. It's easier and faster to update if you think about just trying to keep up with all the OSHA, MSHA, DOT, and other regulations you need to keep up with, and then keep track of what PowerPoints you're supposed to be updating and when. Many times it's going to be a lot easier, again, to farm that out to a company who have people who are doing that every day and aren't doing all the things you're doing. We're going to talk about this later, but you can use it as part of a blended learning solution to increase the effectiveness of your training. Another thing you can use it for is not training in particular, but as performance support. So if you train me how to do something in January and then I'm out in March at that pump, for example, and I don't quite remember the procedure from January, traditionally there'd be maybe two options. Maybe I'd track somebody down, or I'd find a written procedure, and possibly more likely I would just make it up and do what I think is right. But now you can, especially with these mobile devices, you have the ability to bring me the SOP, put it in my hand, and I can see it right there at the pump. So I'm not going to be making things up as often. And then finally, and this might not be something that occurs to you initially, but a lot of you probably work for companies who one of your corporate goals or corporate values or whatever it is going to be to create a more sustainable future, maybe in particular with an eye toward something like global warming and your carbon footprint. And if you have a lot of people traveling around for training, you are not reducing your carbon footprint, you are adding to it. If you start implementing more online safety training in some cases, you can reduce that reliance on travel and reduce your carbon footprint. And it's another way to have the safety department come in line with you know, the values and goals of your business. Now, looking from the other angle for the employees, one of the great benefits of this is they get to complete the training, they assign training on their own schedule. So it's not entirely up to the trainer and when the trainer in their room is available, but what's best for the employee. And you know, that's a common adult learning principle, is that people learn at best when they're kind of in control of when they're driving a car. So this is another way to make it easier for employees to finish training when it's best for them. Also, they get to complete training at their own pace. If you've done classroom training, you know that it's pretty hard to find the sweet spot where everybody is keeping up with you. Some people have already got it almost before you started talking. Other people are lagging behind, and it's almost impossible to find that one right speed that fits everybody. And you don't have to do that with online safety training, because again, the employee is in charge of the speed at which they go. A third point is it provides, if you will, safety in two different ways. The first is if you have an online course that allows people to ask questions or answer questions or do practice and get it wrong, that they're safe, because especially if they're the kind of person who doesn't want to be a little bit embarrassed in a classroom environment, they can get it wrong in private with them on their own. They can see consequences or get feedback and not be embarrassed by that. So you have that element of safety. And then, of course, some online courses, and you're going to see this more and more with virtual reality, allow me to practice an actual job task, perhaps a dangerous job task. And, you know, in the online or virtual world, I can get the answer wrong, and the thing might explode, for example, but it's a fake explosion in online safety training. And I'm learning from that, but I'm not endangering my coworkers. So there's obviously a benefit to that as well. If you're using online safety training to provide information and knowledge, for example, that's going to leave more time for the employee to work one-on-one with a manager and supervisor on advanced things like skill development. So that'll help the employee when he or she is trying to move up the job ladder. And then finally, it also provides an opportunity for elective-based training. So it gives me access to training above and beyond what's actually been assigned. And if I want to learn more, I can.
So Jeff, we actually had a question come in that goes along with that. Is there any training that cannot be done online, such as HAZWOPER or confined spaces? They've been told in the past that a live trainer must be present for these.
Yeah, and I think that's Johnson. Hi, Johnson. Thanks for the question. Yeah, there is. I'm not going to lie to you, I'm not an expert on HAZWOPER. My company provides the training, but it's not something I know in detail. But there's actually a lot of training that can't be done purely online. And it's a great question, because we're leading right into the recent OSHA letters of interpretation on exactly that issue. So if you'll accept a short answer is yes. And then if you'll accept a slightly longer answer, it's stay tuned, and I'll tell you about OSHA's letter of interpretation and some methods for blending online training with instructor-led training for a blended learning solution and increased instructional effectiveness. Anything else, Casey?
No, that looks like it was the only question. So with that, you can go ahead into some of how this comes into play with OSHA and ASSP.
All right, it's like Johnson had ESP. Good one. So we're going to talk both about the OSHA regulations, in particular, essentially what Johnson just asked, and also the two standards put out by the ASSP and ANSI on issues related to EHS training in general and online EHS training in particular. Since 1994, at least, OSHA has explicitly said it's okay to use online safety training. And again, this is another one of those things we have available at the Convergence Training blog. If you really want to, if you want to see the actual letters of interpretation, you can go to our blog and just search letters of interpretation or something. It's a recent blog post, or you can email me and I'll get them to you as well. But in 1994, OSHA clarified that it's okay to use online safety training. But this past calendar year, I believe in the fall, they issued a 2019 letter of interpretation, which essentially said, this is a paraphrase here, that you must use online safety training in combination with some form of instructor-led and hands-on training. So if Johnson, if you're concerned about OSHA compliance, and I bet you are, and a lot of people are, then you are correct that there's some kind of training that is not going to be acceptable if you just use online safety training. And Johnson, if your question in particular about HAZWOP, if it was particular about that, feel free to write me an email, jdalto@convergencetraining.com, and we can see what we can learn about that. But so obviously, you don't want to use just online safety training really for anything that's OSHA compliance-based requirement. Now that doesn't mean you couldn't use online safety training for other things, but at some point you might have to answer to OSHA for your mandatory OSHA training requirements, and you're definitely going to want to show them that when you are using online safety training for those training requirements, that you're blending it with some form of instructor-led or hands-on training as well. Now, the other thing I wanted to call out is these two standards from ANSI and ASSP, Z490.1 and Z490.2. Z490.1 is the standard, the overarching standard for all EHS training, environmental health and safety training. And in that standard, which we're actually working to revise this calendar year, so watch out for that. But they essentially say it's fine to use training of a variety of different delivery methods, including online safety training, and they recommend using blended learning solutions. And then in Z490.2, this is a brand new standard. We actually, I helped create this one, and we just wrap this up in the fall. And that essentially confirms the Z490.2 is the standard for online environmental health and safety training. And it confirms what I just said about trying to use blended learning solutions when you can. Now, if you want to hear more about those two standards, probably a great place, other than behind the standards, which, of course, please do. The ASSP has a safety podcast channel, and back in November of the previous calendar year, they interviewed me twice, one on each of those standards. So I feel like they're podcast number 29 and 30. You see them represented on the screen here. Safety, health, and environmental training, and e-learning and safety, health, and environmental training. That's a good place to start if you want to learn more about either of those standards, each in about 25 minutes long.
So talk to us a little bit more about blended learning, Jeff. Online, in person, go into a little more detail.
Sure, will do. I think an interesting thing to know about it is, one of the things to know about me is I'm really interested in evidence-based training practices, not just things that we think might work, but things that we have evidence proving or showing that they work and that they're effective. And as a result, I follow a lot of learning research professionals. So I want to discuss that briefly in the context of this blended learning we're talking about. We've already mentioned OSHA requires it for your mandatory OSHA compliance safety training. We've mentioned that ASSP recommends it in the Z490 standards. I'm going to lay out some evidence for you in the following screens that it is in fact more effective than either online safety alone, online training alone, or instructor-led training alone. And then again, I want to point out this is one of those things where we have more materials at the Convergence Training blog. If you want to get started on this, we have something called the Blended Learner's Beginning Guide. I think it's 30 pages of ideas about how to do this. But here's a meta study from the US Department of Education. And I won't read this word for word, but here's their meta study showing that blended learning solutions created more positive results than either online alone or instructor-led alone. Again, if you want to email me, I can get you this report. A classic, one of the all-time classic learning research professionals is Dr. Ruth Colvin Clark. One of the all-time classic books is her book called Evidence-Based Training Practices. And here again, evidence from crunching numbers from hundreds of studies showed that blended learning environments are more effective than pure classroom or pure digital. And then another guy who I really recommend is Dr. Will Thalheimer at Work Learning Research. And again, he did the same study or series of meta-analyses, and he found that blended learning using both online learning and classroom instruction creates the largest benefits. Again, more so than online learning, more so than instructor-led. So there's a ton of data out there showing why blended learning works better. If you were to ask me why, which I invite you to do in an email, I will tell you in advance. I don't really exactly know the answer. I've got two guesses. If you're curious, feel free to email me about that. Now, a couple quick ways, again, we cover this more in that blended learning guide, but a couple quick and easy ways for you to start blending learning during your safety training. I'm representing here in 4 different models. So model 1 would be just use your online training before your classroom training. And maybe one of the things you're doing here is using an online safety training course that provides information and knowledge, and you're really focusing on, and maybe it demonstrates a performance. And then in the classroom, you're really focusing on additional performance demonstrations, asking employees to show that they can do it, and then Q&A and feedback. And for those of you who don't know, feedback is one of the, on performance demonstrations, is one of the greatest learning accelerators you can get. Option 2, you can use primary classroom training and then follow that up with online training. And you can do that any way you want, but one of the best ways to do that is to follow up with small little abbreviated chunks of online learning and what learning and development professionals nowadays call micro-learning. But if you go to a primary training classroom session in January, you're probably all familiar with the fact that people have a tendency to forget a large amount of that pretty quickly. And using this kind of online training in something that learning professionals call spaced practice or spaced learning, that will really help combat that forgetting curve so people don't forget as much. And if well designed, not just combat the forgetting curve, but increase the learning curve. Another option is, and option 3 here, bottom left, is to just use online training during your classroom training. So you start up the class, you have some discussions and demonstrations, you throw up a course and everybody watches something, the kind of thing that maybe is hard for you to illustrate or demonstrate in a classroom, and then you can come back and discuss it. And you can do that repeatedly within the actual classroom itself. And then the last one, I've already hinted at this idea, you'll have some kind of primary training, and that could be classroom or online or whatever, but you're going to use the online materials for that performance support we talked about as well. So that it's not really training, but it's a way to tell me exactly what I need to know at the moment of need in the job, in the flow of my work. So I'm replacing a valve, and I use a mobile device to pull up an SOP, for example.
So there was one more question that came in. Is there a list or guide on which training requires a live instructor, such as initial training or follow-up training, renewal training? Does that guide exist? And that was Johnson again.
Yeah, so I don't know that there's an exhaustive universal guide for that kind of thing, Johnson. And I definitely encourage you to, Casey, can I ask you to email Johnson my email address? But I think the easiest answer for that, at least within OSHA, is you need a live instructor or field-based training or hands-on instruction for everything. You may want to add an online safety training component, and I would encourage you to do so in many cases, or at least to consider it, because you're going to get better learning effectiveness. But universally, including things I'm not super familiar with, like DOT and MSHA. I know a bit about MSHA, EPA. It's a little bit beyond my expertise, to be totally honest. But definitely within OSHA, you need that on some form of interpersonal training for everything. I hope that helps. Anything else, Casey?
Yes, we had another question. Is there a list, and this was from Carrie, is there a list to verify or qualify a provider of e-learning for a company? So where can you find out, I think she's asking if that provider is a certified provider of that training, like a checklist to audit the vendor?
Yeah, so let me try to answer that question in a few bits. So one, I'm going to give a list soon, a list of criteria to use when you are evaluating those e-learning courses and also the provider. Additionally, and that's going to be a bulleted list, and I'm going to talk about it for a couple minutes during this webinar. Additionally, I have extensive and long blog posts on how to evaluate courses, how to evaluate an LMS, and how to evaluate a provider at the Convergence Training blog. So that'll go into much more detail than what I'll have to cover in a few minutes today. Another way to think about that is to look at safety organizations, places like ASSP and National Safety Council, places like safety publications. I don't know a lot of their names, to be honest, ISHN and other publications, and you'll see ratings and so on, and suggestions. Especially, I know ASSP has if you're an ASSP member, which I am, there's online discussion boards where people, recommend things. That can be a helpful outlet. Another source is places like third-party sites that do something like CNET, but for technology and workplace technology, something like Capterra might be a good source. Now, in terms of qualifying or certifying the actual instructor or certifying a training provider, I don't really think that exists. It's good to know what kind of training people have, and it'd be nice to know, oh, do you have a degree in instructional design, or do you have a degree in adult education or something like that? But if you look at the OSHA regulations essentially on certification of trainers, they're usually talking about it's usually the boss or owner who's in charge of saying this is essentially a competent person or qualified to lead this training. And feel free to email me as well on that, but I think that's the general OSHA vibe on that kind of thing. And MSHA Part 48 has a specific thing for requirements for a Part 48 trainer. Those are people who are underground. But feel free to send me more information about that, and I hope that helped as well.
Okay. And I'm handing your email address out like candy, Jeff. So.
All right, and I see Michael Owens asking about the 2019 OSHA letter of interpretation. It is a letter of interpretation, fall of 2019. And if you go to the Convergence Training blog, sometime in the last 3 months, we wrote an article specific about it. Or again, feel free to send me that email, and I'll get you a link to that article. And that article includes a link to the letter of interpretation. All right, so with that, Casey, any other questions, or should I start talking about how people should conduct their search?
I think those are, one second, nope, just more people asking for your email address. So yeah, tell us more about conducting your search when it comes to looking for online training.
Great, I will do, it's cool that folks are asking for my email address. I also encourage you guys to track me down on LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn, and connect with me there too. I share a lot of this kind of stuff. All right, so let's start here. The first message I would encourage you for actually starting your search is to not go it alone, to develop a team at your workplace, and to take a little moment before you just go out and buy some online safety training to ask yourself as a team, what am I actually hoping that this new thing is going to do for my organization? So represented here on the left, I would invite you guys to, before you start doing this all on your own, to figure out a list of stakeholders at your workplace who are going to be affected if you start implementing online safety training at work, who might know things you don't know and might help you make a better decision. And also, if you leave them out, you risk losing their buy-in and making it more likely that the implementation of your online safety training will fail or will not succeed as well as you had hoped. So some obvious people to think about, corporate and top-level CEO. Safety people always talk about the importance of getting corporate buy-in and encouragement and support. Secondarily, and I think this is easy to forget, employees. This is who we're trying to train. And I think you're going to get much more buy-in on any online safety training if you involve employees in this process from the ground up. HR, because they're going to be doing because they're doing their own compliance-based training, and there's a obvious connection there, but also because they also house your learning and development people, or L&D if you're so lucky as to have your own L&D department. Operations, because oftentimes safety is essentially applied operations, and likewise, obvious partners are going to be quality and environmental if you have them in-house as well, and then obviously IT are going to have some things to say and some useful things to share. And then once you have that team, I would recommend sitting down and analyzing what is our corporate learning strategy, what is our safety training strategy, what's the whole kind of, where would online safety training fit within our learning ecosystem, if you will, and write up some use cases about what you really want this online safety training solution to do. Then when you go out to evaluate those different options, you'll have essentially a checklist approach to see what's important and what's not. And I mentioned the email you'll get next week provides a online safety training buyer's guide checklist. That's not a bad first place to start creating your use cases. Now, I don't know everybody's particular safety training needs, so I made it longer than it needs to be. But I think it's not a bad place to start, is to download that guide, and look at it, star the items that you think are relevant, and cross out the ones that you don't, and then maybe add your own down the road. So, but definitely think about developing those use cases and what you're really looking for before you go shopping. Now, we're going to walk you through some criteria for courses, LMSs, and providers, and then we'll wrap up with questions. So again, and I've got a longer blog post about this at the Convergence Training blog. But when you're evaluating courses, the first thing to think about, we talked about it at the top of the hour, do I want streaming courses or do I want e-learning courses? E-learning courses, again, go within an LMS. And one nice thing to know, or important thing to know about e-learning courses, is they actually come in different formats. I'm dating myself, but it would be like the beta versus VHS thing. So you have to make sure you're buying your e-learning course in the correct format so that it will play in your LMS. Here's the three most common formats. SCORM, this is the industry standard right now. All courses you're going to get are probably going to be in SCORM. AICC, that's the old standard. It's still around, it's still kind of floating around, but it's much less common. And the people who made AICC no longer support it. So, it's in some aspect of its death throes. And then Experience API or XAPI, and that's kind of the new kid on the block. And it's much less common, and it's probably honestly much less common in the kind of workplaces where a lot of you safety pros are working at. But know about it and know that it's going to become more common as well. You're going to want to make sure the topics match the kind of training you need at your workplace. And in particular, you're going to want to see if the training is really it's not just regurgitating your regulation, but if it's really integrated to performing job tasks, because training is really about behavior change. You're trying to teach people to perform a job safely. So this really should be integrated to the performance of a job task and not just regurgitating a regulation. Obviously, you do need to meet regulatory compliance requirements, OSHA, DOT, MSHA, EPA, whoever it is. You do want to have quality instructional design and adult learning principles. Again, we have a lot of materials at the Convergence Training blog to help gear you up on instructional design, adult learning principles, and evidence-based training. We had an entire hour-long webinar in the fall on evidence-based training and also on effective safety training. So feel free to check those out. A general rule, shorter is better. Visuals. We are visual creatures. A large percent of our brain is dedicated to processing visuals. If you can get online courses with great visuals that truly illustrate the safety point, fantastic. Writing, you want it, again, you want the whole course to be brief, and you want the writing to be brief, and data shows in a conversational language that's familiar to the learners. So it doesn't have to be unnecessarily formal. It doesn't have to use all sorts of big words. And in fact, those things hurt training effectiveness. A lot of you probably work with a multi-language workforce, so multi-language support. Can my learner, take this in English and Spanish just by flipping a button? Do the courses offer both practice so that people can, see if they understand or see if they can do something, and assessments or tests? How often are new courses delivered, and how often are existing courses updated? Why do updates happen, and how? And then how does this course fit within my overall learning strategy? And here I'm talking not just about your blended learning solution, which we're encouraging, but that bigger aspect of what I might call your learning ecosystem, your onboarding, your mentoring, those unofficial pre-task and post-task discussions. If you do incident investigations, into that context, or if you do an alternative incident investigation like Todd Conklin's learning team activities, how does this all fit in together? Now, secondarily, for the LMS, I'm going to just give you some general tips that probably any trainer would be concerned about, and then we'll dial in on some safety aspects. Is it installed on my network, or is it cloud-based? This is a key one. How easy is the user interface? To a large degree, your implementation of online safety training and an LMS in particular will sink or swim based on whether or not it's easy to use. That's both for the admin and for the employee. What kind of reports can I get? This is also key. Can I integrate it with my other workplace software systems? You might not think about this, but it's important if they can communicate and share data with things like your HRIS or your CRM or your ERP. What kind of security roles are set up so that different administrators can do different things within the system? What kind of training comes along with the system, both for admin and employees? Does it also involve self-guided help so I can just learn something on my own? What kind of customer service comes with it? Even the best LMS is going to require some customer service, and to a large degree, that customer service personnel is going to really be a great, they're going to be important in the sink or swim equation. And then how often is this LMS updated? Now, specific to safety, can you import your own training materials, your own safety PDFs and PowerPoints? Can you create your own activities? In particular, do they have tools for SOPs or procedures? Is there a robust assignment engine that handles things like due dates, expiration dates for training that people have to take every year or every 3 years, et cetera? Do people get notified when they're approaching due dates, when their training is about to expire, when their training has expired? And does that LMS have something like an integrated incident management system or an integrated safety management system, some kind of tool, so you're using one solution for all of that? Those are very helpful things. And then lastly, criteria for your safety training providers. This is a big investment. You'll be ideally working with this company for a long time, and you want to, they're going to be a partner, and you want to make sure they're going to be a good partner. So the list on the left: are they friendly? Are they responsive? Are they helpful? Are they knowledgeable? Do they have a wide range of expertise in-house? Do they have a proven track record in safety training? And even better, a proven track record of safety training in your industry? Obviously, how much does it cost, and what are the different options for buying? Can you get referrals from third-party organizations, which kind of touches on a question I was asked earlier, like Capterra, for example? Can you get referrals from existing customers? That would be fantastic if you can actually talk on the phone with somebody who's using the system. And then how accessible are the providers? How often can I reach them? How do I reach them? Is it phone, email, fill in a form? All right, so that's what I've got for you. Casey, any questions?
We did have a question from Steve. Steve would like to know, for clarification, does OSHA certify or approve trainers? I thought it was someone with industry safety experience of 3 to 5 years that passes a test. Did this change?
I believe, Steve, I believe that's incorrect, but I'm not going to tell you I'm the exhaustive final oracle on this issue. Feel free to email me. I think OSHA doesn't tend to have universal safety training regulations, right? They tend to embed them into specific standards. So the first place I would refer you to and me to, I'll go on this journey with you together, is there's a newly revised OSHA publication that includes reference to all the safety training requirements and all the different safety standards. And I'll start, if you email me, Casey, if you can send Steve my email address, please. I will start by getting you access to that report, and then I will begin researching that report, and then I'll get back to you, or you can get back to me. But I don't know anything certainly OSHA says you need these competent people to lead training, and they tend to define competent person differently on a per standard basis. But I personally don't know anything about a 3 to 5 year, and I've never heard anything about passing a test. Now, there is the thing called the OSHA authorized trainer for 10 and 30 hours. I'm one of those. I did have to pass a test to do that, but you do not need to be an OSHA authorized trainer for 10 and 30 hours in order to lead safety training at work. That's a different thing. But if anyone knows that I'm wrong, please share.
Okay, what about the safety training in other languages for Latin American countries, specific languages? How do you consider those specific languages to keep appropriate understanding?
Yeah, so I guess taking that issue in two different ways, just taking it generally, it is, and I know there's other safety training considerations other than just OSHA, but there is an OSHA requirement that you have to ensure that you're delivering your safety and health training in a language that your employees understand. So that's on the employer to do that. You can do that in any number of ways, and if you're doing instructor-led training and you have a part of your employee population that speaks English, provide training to them in English, and if you have a part that only understand Spanish, for example, make sure you're providing that in Spanish. And make sure that there's an assessment so you can be sure that they understand it as well. Remember, OSHA leaves that to the employer to ensure that the employee understands. So one of the best ways to ensure your employee understands is not just to deliver it in a language that you think they understand, but to ensure that understanding through some form of assessment. Now, with online learning in particular, a lot of courses, some safety training providers won't be able to provide a course to you that you can essentially toggle between different languages. And other providers will give you that ability. And so you can assign a course, and maybe you assign it to me, and I have the option of selecting English, Spanish, or Thai, or whatever it is. And so you want to, if you're working with a provider who has some of that functionality, you want to figure out, well, how hard is it for the learner to make that choice? Or do I have to individually make that choice as an admin? It's easier if the learner is making that choice on his or her own. And then once that choice is made, what does that really mean? A lot of safety training has words on the screen and an audio narration. So let's say I switch from English to Spanish. Does it just change the audio narration, or do the words on the screen change as well? And again, what about the words in the practice exercises and the words in the test? Do they change? And obviously, I refer to the idea of ensuring that people understood it by making sure that test is in a language they understand and that they pass the test. And that's a big strength of online safety training, is you already have the assessment usually built in. I hope that helps. What's next, Casey?
So we did have quite a few more questions come in, and I'll get to those. I just want to let everyone know who may have joined a little late or just didn't hear the beginning part of it. The entire presentation and this recording will be made available to all registrants. You didn't have to be an attendee either. As long as you registered for this webinar, we will be sending you the recording and the presentation. And I have also, if you can see, I also sent out the link to the convergence training blog. So everyone should have that as well. With that, we had about 5 more questions come in, Jeff. In the interest of time, I might just get to a couple of these and then maybe hand out the email addresses for the rest of them. We'll start with the first one. What type of documentation does OSHA require to validate a blended hands-on training?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's Ronnie. I think that OSHA's it pretty lax on actual specifications of what your training records have to be. I think that if you have a training record saying people completed this instructor-led training and people completed this computer-based training, that will be fine. With the instructor-led training, if you want to, you can sometimes get or require signatures from people, and a lot of the online training tools have capability to get a digital signature or at least a check the box. But again, you have the capability to have an assessment, and that's all logged by the LMS. I believe that would be enough. There's some additional requirements or recommendations in the ASSP standards, but that's not an OSHA compliance law. But I think if you're just documenting, if you're keeping records, and you know that I was in an online course for 27 minutes on January 3rd, and that I answered these questions and I got these 10 right and these 2 wrong. If you have a record that shows that, I know for certain that many OSHA inspectors have looked at training records from our company with that kind of information and have been more than pleased with that.
Okay, great. So, when you were speaking to this earlier about in-house safety training and certification, somebody commented, this is Suresh actually said, you don't need to be certified to do in-house safety training, but under NASP, if you do the CSM, Certified Safety Managers Program, you can teach and issue certificates.
I thank Suresh for that. I will personally have to look up NASP, which an acronym I don't know, maybe National Association of Safety Professionals, and the Certified Safety Manager Program. I'm not super knowledgeable about that. I apologize. It sounds kind of familiar with maybe the Board of Certified Safety Professionals, but I'll have to look into that, but we appreciate the info, Suresh.
Okay, and we are at the 2 o'clock hour. I'm going to go ahead and ask David's question. Do you have any recommendations for training programs outside of OSHA? For example, the EM 385-1-1, more tailored to government work, more strict in different categories. David is trying to create a better program, but there's not many online trainings in this type of environment.
Yeah, I saw that acronym and I was like, oh my gosh, I sure don't know what that means. David, I will get in touch with you. I think by outside of OSHA, you mean it's not for an OSHA compliance requirement, but some other training I need to do. I will look up what EM 385-1-1 means, and I'll be happy to work with you. Feel free to send that email to me, prompt me, and we can work on this together. And what you're trying to do is create a better training program, and I'm happy to work with you on that as well, even beyond EM 385-1-1, just by trying to get you some evidence-based training methods, and maybe I can even teach you some things about how to use not just to partner with a training provider, but in some cases you might want to create your own e-learning courses with something called a e-learning authoring tool, which is a software my company doesn't make, but a good thing to know about. So I'll try to help you out on that.
Okay, great. That wraps up the questions. I'm sending your email address to a couple other people who had asked for your email address. And just to let everyone know, along with the presentation and the recording, I will include Jeff, with his permission, I will include Jeff's email in that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, and that way everyone will get it. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, I think that should do it.
Well, I want to quickly thank everyone for stopping by. I want to thank you all for the questions, and once again invite you to connect, and we'll keep working on any open questions there are. And other than that, I wish you all a great day and a good rest of the year.